Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Coaching Network. I am Maria Medina, your business and networking coach. And I had the privilege of attending a workshop with my next guest through Goldman Sachs 10,000 Small Businesses. And everything she was saying really hit home. And I wanted to get her insight on some other things that could be relevant to my small business owners, my sales professionals, and anybody watching out there that could help them in business. So I invited her to come on here, and we're just going to have a lively discussion about a book that we have chosen. Lauren, if you could go ahead and introduce yourself.
Sure. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. So my name is Lauren Beitelspacher. I am a marketing professor at Babson College. My official title is the Ken and Nancy Major Romanzi Senior Term Chair in Marketing. So my business cards are like this long. But yeah, so I'm really excited to be here. I teach marketing. My specialty is in retail and sustainable consumption. But I have taught, as you mentioned, quite frequently in the Goldman Sachs 10,000 Small Businesses program, which is my favorite because working with adult learners is fantastic because you really want you have limited time and you're eager to learn and excited to learn, and it really encourages us to make sure that we're like spot on with our content and honoring and valuing your time.
I think that's so important. And I had a workshop earlier this morning where I was talking about knowing your audience, and knowing when your audience is receptive to what you're saying is so much more motivating than when somebody is forced to be there to listen to you.
I know. I mean, I teach undergrads and grads, and they're wonderful and they're amazing, but I teach at 8 a.m. on Mondays. And sometimes you're like, I know you don't want to be here. I'm so sorry, but like, there's nothing I can do. Like, you have to be here. You got to be in it to win it. So it can be tough, and I really like adult learners too, because you don't have to grade. So that's a good thing for me.
And I'm sure being in marketing, you find creative ways to keep them engaged and really get them into the conversation so that they actually enjoy what they're learning.
Yeah, I mean, we're a private institution and we place a high value on innovative and experiential teaching. And so, we would never just lecture at our students for 90 minutes with a PowerPoint. Like, I don't think any classes work that way anymore here. So, we're very applied, interactive, engaged. It's like we talk about something and then we'll apply it. We'll talk about something and we'll apply it. And a lot of the content is and the assessments are project driven versus, a big midterm and a final. I don't really do that.
I love that because a lot of people get stuck on that standardized testing that just doesn't work for everybody. People learn in so many different ways, and that's standardized. But let's get to. I'm getting off topic. I would talk to you about teaching all day long. Thank you for recommending that book. Thanks 1,000. And some things were coming up while I was reading it. I know it was mainly about gratitude and understanding where things come from and the complexities of what we potentially take for granted every day. And some of the things that came up for me from a business perspective was the complexities of supply chain management, and how people don't realize how much it takes to produce and source things for certain products or services. And I know this came up a lot, especially during COVID, and it comes up during recessions or times. I mean, it'll start coming up right now with all the tariffs that are being imposed. And as much as they know about these things, they don't prepare for them, and they don't have additional sources, additional vendors where they can get the supplies that they need. So, from your perspective and from a marketing perspective, what can companies do to sort of combat the availability of things as they become less available, as well as potentially looking at their processes to make it easier for their staff, for their team to sell and to promote what they're trying to sell?
Well, that's a very big question. So I wish that I could give like the exact answer, because I think then I would be like a multi-millionaire. But what I try to teach is that the number one thing is just understanding that it's complex. I think sometimes a lot of entrepreneurs and small businesses spend so much time thinking about the novelty or the innovation of their products that they forget the sourcing and the distribution. And you could lose all of your margin by, just picking the wrong transportation method, for example. There's a very different cost associated with transporting something by boat versus transporting it by air. And so even if you are costing something really low and you find this great provider, transporting it could, there's lots of different things that could erode your margins and really keep your business from being its full success. So I think that, the one thing that small businesses need to do is do their research and really get a lot of competitive insights. It's hard, especially when you're manufacturing a tangible good, to get your products manufactured, right? Because a manufacturing facility is going to want bigger orders, and if you're a small business, you don't have the revenue, you don't have the capital to get that big order. So then you have to maybe work with a smaller manufacturer who might not be able to deliver what you need them to deliver. So it's really challenging. I think sourcing and understanding the supply chain and the operations is probably the hardest part for any small business that's trying to actually manufacture a tangible good. So I think the number one thing that businesses need to do is really, really do their research before developing a go-to-market plan, understanding lead times, understanding costs, understanding tariffs. If you're making something, for an example, that's like an apparel item, tariffs are really different if depending on what the apparel item is made of. If it's 49% leather, it's a very different tariff than if it's 51% leather. So considering all of that operational stuff in the design stage is important as well. How would you package it? If you package like this cup in a box, then you have a lot of empty space and then you're not being fully efficient. So what's the best way to package it? So really starting to incorporate the process at the design phase, I think is important as well. And then I think we as consumers need to understand that the fact that we have access to beautiful, fresh produce and vegetables and meats and all this wonderful food, it's unbelievable, right? It really is. The complexities of this global network that we are so privileged to be a part of is really remarkable. And we need to give businesses some grace when there is some disruption. We've been so conditioned to just even thinking about something and then it's showing up, on our doorstep the next day. And that's not sustainable in so many ways. Like, it's not sustainable from an environmental perspective. It's not sustainable from a labor perspective, right? We can't keep working people at all hours of the night. We can't keep having people deliver at all hours of the night. We can't keep expecting, door dashers to be their full livelihood. And we need to give grace. We need to understand how complex it is. And we need to, businesses need to come back and think about what's the right sustainable method, environmentally and socially and economically. And, one thing that I study, and I'm going to deviate for a second, is returns. So a lot of retailers, for example, had these really robust returns policies during COVID to encourage people to buy and like minimize their risk. But now they're starting to see that those returns cost them billions and billions of dollars. And so, if you don't have the operational capacity for the inventory to move the wrong way down the supply chain, then that's not a great option, right? So really rethinking our policies, our target market, how we educate our target market, and all of this is very complicated.
I like that you mentioned, you think you want something, you literally click two buttons and it's at your doorstep, sometimes within hours. And this changes our perception of when we want things and when we expect things to happen. And I find that a lot of my clients, when they hire me, they're going through processes and they get frustrated when things take longer than they should and they're doing it for the first time. And I'm like, how did you know how long it was supposed to take in the first place when you've never done this to begin with? So people forgetting the complexities. And I think also people forget to ask other people that are in the same boat for advice, how long it took them to launch a product or to get a product into market. And the thing about the returns with Amazon, I know I've contacted them and they sometimes said keep it because it's cheaper for you to keep it than for us to take it back, restock it, and try to resell it.
Yes, yes, many retailers do that. Yes, they just tell you to keep it, but then a lot of people have taken advantage of that. So, but the reverse process is not. Very few retailers have that down seamlessly.
Yeah, so it's thinking about it, and I think that speaks to the process mapping and looking at process mapping for production, process mapping for client acquisition and retention. What are every single steps? And people often forget that you learn as you go, and you can adjust your plans as you go. You might find new suppliers, you might find new ways, new technologies are actually coming into the market on a regular basis. And some people just get stuck on that rigid, I made this decision and this is where I have to stick to and go to. And they don't adopt that flexibility. So I don't know if this is out of your scope, but do you have any recommendations for people to be able to like shift that mindset to be able to think bigger, do the research, apply what they've learned, and then adjust as they go?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, kind of going back to your original question, you have to diversify your supply chain. I mean, that's hard when you're small, right? So when you're small, it's not like, I mean, if somebody's going to take your order to produce it, it needs to be a big order. So you can't diversify your orders across multiple manufacturers because they're not going to take a smaller order. But as much as you can, you have to diversify your portfolio and try to find different ways and evaluate alternatives of how you go through your processes. Like, how much control are you willing to relinquish to a third party logistics provider versus if you take that on in house? Understanding all of the costs and benefits associated with each decision before you make the decision. And then giving yourself a point where you say, if it gets to this floor, this is when I change, right? I think that like tells people, okay, if I, it gives them a signal like this is time. Like like what I just, this is a bad analogy, but it's unfortunately the one that's coming to my mind. But, one time, like a couple years ago, we had to put our dog down and it's like, how do you know when it's the right time? And I just remember the vet being like, when they stop eating, like, and then that's when you know. And I think as, business owners, we have to tell ourselves like, what's our barometer for when something isn't working? And it's, that equivalent of like when it's, when it stops eating. And then I think you have to just say, I made a mistake, right? This is what I've learned and move on. And have alternatives in your mind, right? You don't want to, if something isn't going well, you want to at least start considering other options. So that way, if it continues to not go well, you're not scrambling, right? You're not starting from zero to fix it. And there's so many things that can happen in the supply chain that we've seen. Like, there's natural disasters, there's economic changes, there's political changes, there's, if we would have had that port strike, last year, that would have been devastating to our economy. And so, but that's something that's outside of a lot of people's control. And unfortunately, small businesses and rural areas are going to be the ones that are the most impacted by those things, right? Because they're the hardest to get to. They have the least buying power. They're not the biggest customer. They, have more dependence in the supply chain than their bigger counterparts. So, just really being aware of that and building contingencies. And unfortunately, one thing I see some, especially retailers do is in order to buffer for that, then they over inventory. And when you over inventory, then you run the risk of not having any open to buy to get items that your customers actually want. So it's such a fine line. And I don't want to ever minimize or dismiss any of these challenges. They're all really difficult. And it's all, I like to say it's heart and science. It's knowing your business and understanding your business, but then also using data to really inform your business.
I like that you ended in that because the first thing that came to mind was data is king. Like you don't know what you're measuring, you don't know how to shift if you don't have those key performance indicators telling you this is when I shift, this is when something's working. And I come across that so often, especially with my networking clients, where they will join a group, they like the people, but they're not getting business from it, yet they stay in this group for like 2 to 3 years. And I'm like, why did you join in the first place? Did you have goals for when you joined this group that told you, okay, if I don't get business within the first year, I'm going to find a different group? Because maybe you're not in the right group and they're scared to change the group because they like the people. And then I always tell them, well, then change the goal. If this group is now for socializing, then that's what it is. But don't call it networking for business if this group isn't actually networking and producing business for you. And I think that's a mind shift change that people have to make, where they're analyzing their decisions on a more critical data basis with information that they know themselves, but also information that they're gathering from their clients.
And that's such a great point. And, something that I study actually is these interorganizational relationships. So, especially like from the retailer perspective, the reliance and dependence on the vendors that supply them the inventory. When we study those relationships, we actually study it in the context of an interpersonal relationship, right? Like a lot of the variables that we use to discuss a successful interorganizational relationship are things that you would also use to describe a successful, interpersonal partnership: commitment, trust, communication, all of these things. And these relationships, even though they're organizational, they are built on people. So there's still this very human component, this feeling of reciprocity, that if somebody's done something for you, you want to do something for them. But ultimately, each business has to behave opportunistically. So it's like, how do you behave opportunistically, looking out for yourself and looking out for your company's best interests while also trying to nurture these relationships? And I think that that's really hard. That's a hard balance, like a hard balance to find.
And I think we could have a whole conversation and negotiation tactics and finding the best possible outcome for both. And ultimately, how to negotiate with vendors, how to have those conversations, but also how to build the relationships so that when something does happen to the supply chain or whatever it is that goes wrong with your business, your internet goes down, maybe you get a letter from the IRS, that your supplier and vendor know you well enough and you have that relationship and that trust established that you can just pick up the phone and speak with them. And I talk to this a lot to my clients because they do this with their clients and for sales, but they forget to do it with their supply chain.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you have to, right? You got to go up and down. Those relationships are important both ways because you're your supplier's customer, right? So you deserve the same kind of customer service that you're giving.
And when they go above and beyond, you're able to thank them, have that gratitude, and know that, hey, you took care of me, much like this book says. I know the challenges that the industry is facing, yet I know that, like, I faced this personally. I owned a print shop during COVID, and I had one guy that whenever there was paper at the port, I he texted me, so I had first dibs, because I was grateful to him and I gave him thank you cards and I gave him gift cards just to stay on top of mine so that he would do that. I would love to carry on this conversation because this book brought so many things, but we're short on time. If anybody does want to reach out to you, what's the best way for them to reach out to you?
LinkedIn is probably the best. Yeah, Lauren Beitelspacher. There's only one. So I'm glad you enjoyed the book. I think it's really important. I think gratitude is lost, especially after COVID. And, sometimes we get in our own ways about like just thinking we need something and being really mad when it's not there. And there's so much complexities. I mean, just I think if we all, especially in the United States, if we could go to the grocery store and just be like, wow, this is an abundance and the complexities to get this all here to me, and have this attitude of gratitude, I think it would kind of change a lot of perspectives.
Yeah, I think it's curbing our expectations to more of a blessing rather than, oh, yeah, of course I should have this available to me. Of course. So thank you so much again. And I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you have any questions, make sure to comment below and I'll see you next week.